All right, guys, we are going to talk about the National League, and we're going to do a quick preview, overview style. Although this should be a lot more fun than what the American League was for 2019. So again, we're going to start with how they finished a year ago, and then we're going to kind of adjust that out to see what they should have done versus what they did do. And then we're going to kind of grade them into this current season and see sort of how things break down. So the first thing is we need to look at last year, and the Los Angeles Dodgers won the National League pennant a year ago, and the loss to the Boston Red Sox in the World Series. And the Dodgers were a team that really were pushed last year. They got off to such a bad start, and then the Colorado Rockies pushed them all the way to the final game, so they had to play a in-game National League West playoff game to see who would win the actual National League West. So they played 163 games instead of 162, and the Dodgers won that game, so they were the National League West winners. There was also another play-in type of game a year ago, and that was with the Cubs and the Brewers, and the Brewers won that game, and then the Cubs became a wild card team. So the National League was very competitive in the West and in the Central a year ago, and surprisingly, the Atlanta Braves took off last year, won the division, and won it handily. Actually, I mean, when you win by 8 games, that's pretty good, and they would surprise me when it comes to that part of it. I did like them better than the Phillies, but I did not think that they were going to be better than the Nationals, who were just a mess. So let's look at kind of how things break down and what should have happened versus what did happen. And it's kind of interesting to start to look at this because we're going to talk specifically about the National League East and then the Central and then the West. So in the East, the Atlanta Braves, they won last year. They won 90 games. They should have won 91 games. So that's not a huge advantage or a huge edge. But here comes the big difference. The Washington Nationals won 82, so they were only 2 games over 500. But they should have won 88 games. So that gap is really not 8 games difference between the two teams. There's only 3 games of a gap difference between the two going into the 2019 season. And then with the adjustments that the Washington Nationals made, and really not anything that the Braves have done, we're going to look for the Washington Nationals to really take more strides forward here and become the best team in the National League East. But we're going to look at that. The New York Mets, they won 77 games last year. They should have won 77 games. The Phillies, they won 80 games. They should have won 77. So them and the Mets are an equal teams going into this season. Both teams made significant roster changes. I don't like what the Mets have done compared to what others do. And the reason is because they've brought in a lot of aging guys, and even starting with the preseason here and the exhibition games, a lot of the Mets players are dinged up when they've got hamstring problems or knees problems or oblique problems. So it's a problem already for the Mets. The Phillies are younger, and the players they brought in are going to be agile and quick and good, and I think the Phillies made some really smart moves. And then, the Marlins, they're just out of it. They're not ready to compete yet. They got rid of their best player in Real Muto, so they're not going to go anywhere. They don't have any pitching that's going to sustain anything. All right, so let's kind of look at where we think things are going to go in the National League East. And when you look at this is what I think is really kind of crazy about some of this stuff. When you look between Fangraphs and you look at the projections that Baseball Prospectus puts out, these can be anywhere. I mean, these teams are crazy right now. Fangraphs have the Nationals 5 games better than the Mets. So they have them at 90 wins and the Mets at 85 wins. And Baseball Prospectus has the Nationals at 89 wins and the Mets at 87 wins. So it's that close. And then they have the Braves at 85 and the Phillies at 85. So in theory, you have those 4 teams covered by a gap of 4 games for the Baseball Prospectus. So it's a matter then of kind of figuring out where you think things are going to go and how you think things are going to land. And we spoke about this a little bit in the American League preview, and we'll talk about it again here. The Nationals were a mess last season. They had a lot of players who did not perform up to their normal standard. So that means they're a team on the rise. Plus, they brought in hole fillers that should do a much better job for the Nationals on offense, and they'll be better on defense. Even without Bryce Harper, this is going to be a team that can sustain that loss. They have Victor Robles, who's going to take his place. This is just a very, very solid baseball team. And if they looked at 88 wins that they should have had a year ago, I'm going to give them 5 more possible for this year, and that puts them at 93 wins as a target for the Washington Nationals, and I think they're going to win the East. And then you start to look at who's next, and I have the Braves and the Mets in that category. The Braves should have won 91 a year ago. However, they are in a position where they didn't get they got a lot out of their rookie players. We'll have to see. A lot of times they go through that second season or third season where they have to adjust, and it takes them a while to get there. But the Braves' issue is they don't have enough solid pitching. If you're going to look at the Nationals, and they're going to throw Scherzer out there, Strasburg, and then Corbin, and then they picked up that the other guy. So they're going to be in one of those spots where they can go four deep, and Anibal Sanchez, the other guy, they can go 4 deep, and they can beat you with those 4, and the Braves don't have that. And if you look at the Mets starting pitching, we got DeGrom and Syndergaard and Matz and those guys and Wheeler. The Braves don't match up there. And then when you look at the Phillies, with the Phillies with Nola, those guys are much better, and Arrieta, and those guys are much better than the Braves. So the question then becomes is how far do you really move the Braves down? Because, they have young talent. Young talent wins. Young talent plays, but I'm expecting them to be a little lower this year. The bullpen is not, they didn't bring in anybody to fix that. So I'm looking for them from 91 wins to drop down to 85 wins, which is still a little bit above 500. But you also have to consider that the Mets and the Phillies are both stronger. So those teams are going to beat each other up. And it's going to be hard to get over that 90 win number, even though I think that the Nationals are going to get there. And then you have the New York Mets. They should have won 77 games a year ago. I have them with an improved team. I think that you're going to get a lesser Jacob deGrom, but a stronger Syndergaard. DeGrom, won the Cy Young and the earned run average under 2 and all that stuff. That's not going to happen a second year in a row. Even though he's a good pitcher, they just don't back themselves up like that. Those career seasons just don't happen back to back. And that's the same for, the best pitchers. They might still be the best pitchers, but they're not going to have career years. And in this case, I think that the Mets are going to be somewhere in that 85 win too. So they go from 77 to 85. So that's an improvement of 8 games. And that's going to depend totally on their health. But the Phillies, they're at 77 wins, and I've got them going up to 83 wins. And the reason I don't have them quite as high as the Mets here, even though I like a lot of what they did, they need pitching. They have Aaron Nola, and that's really where they're going. I mean, they're going to rely on younger guys to keep developing, and Jake Arrieta to come back and pitch like Jake Arrieta did when he was a Cy Young winner for the Cubs. I think those years are beyond him. I don't think he can do that. I don't think he's got the same stuff to make that happen. And that's going to mean that he doesn't match up to the Mets pitching, and they don't match up to the Nationals pitching. Their offense and defense got fixed. Their offense was atrocious last year, and it got much better with Gene Segura coming over, McCutchen coming over. Those players will do really well in Philadelphia in the bandbox that's there. And if they, for whatever reason, do get Harper, they're going to be even that much better. So I look at it this way. Nationals, Braves, Mets about the same. Phillies just a little below them. And the Miami Marlins kind of out of it. And then the Central is one that's really crazy. Last year went down to the wire. The Brewers beat the Mets. Or Brewers beat the Cubs. They won the division in that last game of the season. The Cubs had to go in as a wild card team. Then they lost, and so they didn't really make the playoffs. So then you look at the Brewers, who got beat by the Dodgers at the end and missed out on going to the World Series. They won 96 games, and they should have only won 92. But that's okay, because the Cubs, who won 95 games, should have only won 92 as well. So, I mean, those teams were even the whole way through. And where the Cubs had issues on offense, they couldn't sustain offense. Cubs had issues at starting pitching. But what's interesting looking at where these divisions are, and we just talked about what Fangraphs showed and what Baseball Prospectus showed, is that the Central is totally whacked between these two sabermetric projections. The first one is the Fangraphs. Fangraphs have the Cubs at 87 wins, the Cardinals at 86 wins. They have the Reds, Brewers at 81 wins, and the Pirates at 80. And then Baseball Prospectus has it where the Brewers are at 88 wins, the Cardinals 85, Reds 81, Pirates 80, and the Cubs 79. So one has the Cubs winning the division, one has the Cubs in fifth in the division. So it's kind of a crazy look at these teams. And these are going to be really interesting, because this is going to be one of the most competitive divisions in baseball, just like the National League East. It's going to be fun. They're going to beat each other up. But this is how I see it, and this is how I think things are going to go. Last year, the Cubs should have won 92 games. I think that the Cubs are in big-time rebound, build-up mode this season. Anthony Rizzo did not perform to his standard, and nor did Chris Bryant, and those are MVP kind of guys. Then they did have Baez play at an MVP level. So, they've got three guys that are just dynamite, that can drive the bus for the Cubs. And I expect them to be a lot better, so I didn't bump up their wins a whole lot because they're playing in that division. I got 92 wins to 95 wins. The Milwaukee Brewers, you got to remember how they won. And again, this is a team that won with big offense, and they won with relief pitching. And relief pitching is going to be one of those things that is good when you have like the Yankees bullpen. The difference being is that the Yankees bullpen is proven, it's veteran, it's done that for year after year after year. Those players are going to perform at the levels that they have all the time. The Brewers with Josh Hader and those guys, that's not always going to be the case. The reality here is that the Brewers are going to have a harder time winning this season. They're going to have a harder time sustaining the offense that they had with the players that they have. Jesus Aguilar had a career year. Yelich had a career year. Kane had close to a career year. So the Brewers are headed more in a downward direction. The Cardinals, the Cardinals won 88 games last year. They should have only won 85 games. I have them picking up a couple games at 88 wins for this year. I like what they did in the bullpen and bringing Miller over. I like what they did with Goldschmidt. I think that provides them with the right RBI kind of guy in the middle that they were missing. And I think Ozuna is going to play much better this season than he did a year ago. So that's going to give them a third RBI kind of guy to go with Carpenter. So you got Carpenter, Goldschmidt, and Ozuna, and I think this is going to be an awesome lineup. The difference is going to be with all of these teams is that the Cubs are going to be able to line up 5 starters that are going to be better than the 5 starters for anybody else in the division. None of the teams, the Cubs, the Brewers, the Cardinals, none of those guys, the Reds, the Pirates probably even closest to the most, but none of them have a true ace pitcher. Like when you go back and you look at, we talked about the Nationals and the Mets, right? And even the Phillies with Aaron Nola. They have proven aces. The Cubs have one from a couple of years ago, John Lester, but John Lester is not a true ace anymore. But he's a solid pitcher, and that's what they have. They have 5 solid guys that are going to start, and that's going to be the difference because Milwaukee doesn't have that. Milwaukee got by with Julius Jashin last year, and that's not going to get the job done for 2019, and then they're going to rely on that bullpen. And I'm telling you that even though that they had a great season a year ago, that doesn't mean they're going to have one in 2019. And the Cardinals, they have depth at pitching, but they have no true ace either. So the difference in the division, because the Cardinals can hit, the Brewers can hit, the Cubs can hit, is that the Cubs can pitch. However, the Cubs are going to need to get that bullpen piece in the back end to make a difference, because the Brewers and Cardinals both have that. The difference, with the bottom end of this division, with the Pirates and the Reds, the Pirates, they won last year 82 games, and they should have only won 79, so they should have fell a little bit. I have them at kind of staying around the same. I've got them at 78 wins. They didn't do much to add to their offense, and they're going to rely on the pitching to keep them in. I think Jameson Taillon's a good pitcher. He might even be the best starter of all of the pitchers in the division. And then they got Chris Archer, who's going to have to throw lights out, and Trevor Williams. Those guys are going to have to really be good to keep the Pirates in it. They just don't have offense. And then the Cincinnati Reds did a whole bunch of stuff. They brought in like the whole Dodgers team. They won last year 67 games. They should have won 68 games. I really like what they've done. They've got a good offense. Now they're going to bring in some solid pitching. I've got them winning 9 more games or so, 10 more games. They're going to be, the target for them is about 78 wins. So that's a big improvement, but that's not going to catch the Cubs or the Brewers or the Cardinals. So I look at it this way. I like the Cubs to win this division. I think they've got the pitching to win. I've got them at 95 wins. I've got the Brewers at 86 wins, the Cardinals at 88 wins, and the Pirates and the Reds at 78 apiece. Those are improvements for the Reds, but it's not ready to compete yet. And then in the West, again, coming into the season last year, the Dodgers were a super team, but they didn't play like a super team. They won 92 games. They should have won 100, though. That's the big difference. They are a 100-win team of what should have happened. But I don't like this team unless they get Bryce Harper. If they get Bryce Harper, that'll help them. What I don't like is that they were a home run hitting team last year, and they got rid of Kemp and Puig. That's a lot of power that's not on the team this year. They're waiting, they got to get Muncy to repeat, and I don't think Muncy's going that guy that's going to be a repeat hitter like he was last year. So I think it was an abnormal season for him. They get Corey Seager back. That's a great help, but coming back from Tommy John, he might not make it through the season the same way that they're expecting him to. So I expect the Dodgers to be down from what should be a 100-win team. I've got them at 93 wins this season, but I also don't like the Rockies. I know a lot of people like the Rockies. The Rockies last year won 91 games, but they should have won 86. Excuse me. But so that makes a difference this way. The Dodgers should have won 100 games. The Rockies should have won 86. That means that the Dodgers really are 14 games better than the Rockies. And the Rockies have a lot to do to improve, and they didn't. And the Dodgers gave up some ground, but that's okay because the Rockies didn't do much of anything. So they didn't get, they brought in that second baseman who's going to play first base. But I don't think that's going to be a big help to them in terms of trying to get to where they need to go. The reason is they got great pitching out of the starting pitching last year. These guys are not sustainable as aces going forward. I think German Marquez is probably the best one. I don't like Freeland that well. I think he had a good year, but I don't, his stuff isn't the best. So I think that going forward, the Dodgers have the deeper pitching, they have the deeper team, and I think that they're going to win. I think the gap's not going to be as far as maybe what the 100 to 86 shows. I have the Rockies down about 5 games. I have them at 81 wins, so right up the 500 number. The Diamondbacks are in sell-off mode. I don't think they're going to be in the Padres, Giants, Marlins kind of territory. Last year, the Diamondbacks won 82, so they were just slightly over 500. This year, they should have won 84. I have them down at least 7 or 8 games, so I've got them at 75 wins. I do like what the Padres did with Manny Machado. I think that's a good move, but they got a lot of ground to catch up. The Padres only won 66 games last year. They should have won 64. That's 22 games different to the Rockies, and that's 36 games different to the Dodgers. So just bringing in Manny Machado isn't going to pick up 36 games. But I do like what they've done. I'm going to bump them up from 64 to 72 wins and be under the 500 number. They're going to really rely on their young pitching developing because that's what they're going to need to get there. And the Giants, the San Francisco Giants won 73 last year, should have only won 69. I do think they're going to be slightly better than that this year. They had a lot of guys that didn't perform. Belt, Panic, Posey, all those guys were Crawford. They didn't, in Longoria, they didn't have their best seasons. They didn't play to their normal potential. So those guys will be better. But again, they're going to be in trouble with pitching. Yeah, they got Bumgarner, but Bumgarner's not the same as what he used to be. I would tell you that if Bumgarner was on the Nationals, he might be the 4th or 5th starter. If he was on the Mets, he would certainly be the 4th or 5th starter. So, you're looking at a guy that used to be the guy you want to give the ball to in the World Series. He's a tough guy. He's a nails guy. He's a competitor, but he doesn't have the same stuff that he used to have. And Johnny Cueto's out for the season, and Jeff Shamarja coming back from his troubles and being injured. I just don't think they're that good of pitchers. So they're going to struggle. Their bullpen's going to struggle. I have them at 72 wins. So I think the West is pretty much the Dodgers going to run away again. I think the Rockies can compete, but I think they'll be more trying to figure out how to get a wild card spot. But I think this is a fun division this year. I think you're going to run into a ton of teams that are going to battle for not only the division leads, but they're going to go up and down for the wild card all season long. The National League is going to be really fun to watch, and I'm real excited for the National League this season.